This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system.
Quite an experience from starting with something we thought that would be quite easy. Little did I know that doing an audit and just trying to verify election integrity was going to turn out to be quite the undertaking and a national, if not international, event. So we're learning a lot from this, which is pretty interesting. First and foremost, what I want to say to everybody here, as well as thank you, if anybody is having a difficult time with the live streaming portion, we are under the understanding that there are a lot of people that are wanting to watch this live, and maybe it is jamming the systems. And I'm looking for my note real quick that I just had. Okay, I can't find it right now. It's if you go to the Senate website, the Arizona Senate, here it is, sorry. Our handle on Twitter is @AZSenateGOP. Our handle on Facebook is @AZSenateRepublicans. On those two sites, you will be able to see a new link, an additional link, so that you may go ahead and sign on if you want. I've also been told that Real America's Voice, One America News, and Victory TV are all live streaming this as well. So there are 3 other options that you can watch. We are also taping this for future reference. You know, we always said that if we have to go to court, we want to make sure that everything has been documented, and we want to make sure that everything is on the record. So this is being taped. I think I heard Mr. Borelli mention, please turn all of your phones on vibrate right now so we don't disturb our speakers. This is a Senate hearing for the Senate and the public. It is an update on the 2020 general election for Maricopa County. We will not be taking any testimony from the public, and the reason for this is an update and a briefing from the people that have been involved, the vendors and the people that are involved with this audit. As a Senate body, we felt that it was necessary for them to come in and tell us what's going on. It's taken longer than we anticipated, than anybody thought was anticipated, and we need to have some answers, and we need to know where we're going from here. So with that, Senator Peterson, to my right is Senator Warren Peterson. He is chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He and I have been working closely with this, and I'll let you start.
Thank you, Madam President. So first, I think we just probably start with introductions. If the speakers who are here, as President Fan said, she's the Senate President. I'm the Judiciary Chairman, Warren Peterson. If we could just start with the 3 who are here to speak, if you could just introduce yourself and maybe provide us with some of your background and credentials. So we'll start here with Mr. Logan.
Thank you, Chairman Peterson. I want to thank you, Chairman Peterson, and Madam President, for all of the support that you've given for the audit. I think transparency has always benefited our democracy, and it continues to be an honor to work with you to bring transparency to our election process. As you know, I'm Doug Logan. I'm the CEO of Cyber Ninjas. I have held several industry-recognized certifications, such as the Certified Information System Security Professional, GIAC Web Application Penetration Tester, and the GIAC Certified Incident Handler. I have personally done work for companies such as JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America, and my company regularly works with Fortune 500 clients and the federal government. Specifically, our specialty is in application security, which allows us to be experts in complicated application systems, such as voting systems. For this reason, we're actually pulled into the work in Antrim, Michigan, and it was my team that helped assist Matt DePerno with a lot of the findings that they've had associated with specifically election software.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett?
Yes, I'm Ken Bennett. I'm the Senate liaison to the audit. And I have an accounting degree from Arizona State University and have been a private businessman for 35 years with a variety of companies, including a 83-year-old family business up in the Prescott area. Served as the Senate President from 2003 to 2007, also as a senator 4 years prior to that, so 8 years in the state Senate from 99 to 2007. I also served as the Secretary of State for the state of Arizona from 2009 until 2015. And as I said, I have been asked to be the Senate's liaison to the audit. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cotton.
My name is Ben Cotton. I am a court-recognized expert witness in digital forensics, in incident response, and I have over 25 years' experience performing these tasks, both for the U.S. government and for private industries such as law firms. We have specialized in providing these types of services now as a private company since 2002, and we continue that support within the industry to this day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Logan, I'm going to ask you to please open this segment up so that we can just walk through where you've been, where we're going, what you need to continue going and get to the end results of whatever those results might be. I know that from the get-go, in the very beginning, we said that we were not going to release any information until the audit was completely finished. But we are at this juncture where I believe you want to share some information with us because of the reasons why we have not still received the things that were on the original subpoena that Maricopa County is withholding from us, as well as additional information you're going to need to complete this full forensic audit. So I will turn this over to you to get us kicked off here.
Awesome. Yes, Madam President. I think what I'd like to start with is we've actually put together a short video that gives an overview of what we've done with the audit and some of the details associated with it. So could we put Exhibit A up on the screens, please?
I think as all my years as a county manager and working at the executive level in local government, I've never seen a process so unprecedented than this audit. The transparency, the accountability, the integrity, and the overall chain of custody is something that is incomparable to any audit that's ever been conducted in the United States. It was an important part of the process in identifying the individuals to assist us in the audit. Background checks had to be done, social media vetting took place, but we didn't care what party you were, whether you were Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, far left, far right. As long as you entered the building with good intention, knowing that you were going to follow a sense of accountability, that you had integrity, and to do the right thing, this is what it was about. We wanted everybody in this building to be beyond reproach. With over 1,500 volunteers and 200 paid staff, we had people from all over the country in all walks of life. It was important because our chain of command was vital to the structural management process of the audit. We had vice presidents, we had managers, and then we had table managers. But people came from all over, from Pennsylvania to Iowa, from Virginia, Washington, D.C., and of course the state of Arizona. We had retired FBI agents, retired IRS auditors. We had technical professionals. We had CEOs of companies, election workers, and supervisors. We had consultants. We had even a United States Air Force general who had retired, who spent every day working tirelessly to make sure the audit was done with quality. Although it was only Maricopa County residents who voted in the last general election, that were able to count ballots and votes. It was important to know that everybody in that building was there for one common goal, and that was to validate the election results and seek out and find any vulnerabilities to provide feedback that would enable Maricopa County's election process to get better, or to provide findings to the Arizona Senate for them to take the necessary measures to restore confidence in the Arizona voter. We had many measures that were implemented to ensure the safety and security of the people within the facility. Badging was something that was very important, where a person to get into the facility had to present their badge, also a legal ID, and be on a list. Another important aspect to this was our COVID protocol, that we ensured that we did not have any issues pertaining to COVID. And people were required to wear masks while on the floor. Any visitors or state delegation personnel that came into the building were also escorted. We had first aid stations on hand, and we had a reunification site set up in the event we had to evacuate the premise. Training was very detailed and extensive. Everyone went through an orientation process before they broke out into their specialized training. If you went to a counting table, you learned what the spinning process was. You actually did a practice tally sheet. You learned what the positions were that were involved in processing ballots and taking ballots off, what table managers did and what pod managers did. If you went into paper examination, you went to a lab where you worked directly with the microscopes and the camera technology in processing the ballots, and the importance of making sure that qualitative images were taken while processing those ballots in the paper examination area. Buzzwords were often used, such as integrity, accountability, chain of custody, beyond reproach, and transparency. And this was the culture that was developed for anyone that stepped in this building. The floor operations had many different moving parts. We had the ballot corrals that stored the ballots and staged the ballots in different ways, from regular storage to staging for paper examination and for staging for further investigation. You had paper examination stations that would then take ballots from the box and process them to obtain the images that were necessary through DSLR cameras and 4 different microscopes that obtained information from each ballot. You had aggregation that would then take the results of the counting tables and input that data into the system to ensure that the proper counts were correct during that process. Ballots didn't move without 3 things: people, paper, and observation. The people who moved them, the paper trail with the chain of custody that followed it, along with the camera observation that did not at any time allow a ballot box to not be seen. The handling of ballots was also very important. Once a ballot box was cut open and the ballots were removed, it was important that we ensured that the ballots were put back the exact same way they were pulled from each of the ballot boxes. Our goal was to make sure that Maricopa County received the boxes back with all the artifacts in it, along with the order of the ballots, the exact same way that we received them. I think with all the outcry of concern the election results displayed, it was important for the Arizona Senate to bring in an independent to evaluate the results. This was done in a way that was unprecedented, that had never been done before, with the detail and the forensic side of the audit. But it was also important to be done in a bipartisan effort with the intent to provide feedback to Maricopa County to enable them to get better in their election process, or to provide findings to the Arizona Senate to enable them to create measures that would ensure that in the future that the residents of Arizona could have confidence in the election process.
Thank you.
That just gives a brief overview of really our heart in doing all this. We've tried to design everything to implement the biblical concept of beyond reproach, so that we would not even have the appearance of evil in anything that we did. The amount of live streaming we have there has been unprecedented. I do not know of another audit that has had so much transparency and video captured. We actually captured, with all our data, over 2 petabytes of data. For you don't know, 1,000 terabytes ends up being a petabyte, and the vast majority of that was video footage. So we have accountability in every action that took place on that floor. There's a lot of great American patriots that are out there, they're part of this process, who gave up time away from their businesses, who gave away, often putting in leaves of absences where they are to make sure they'd be a part of this. I think in total we had over 1,500 people involved in the audit process. Of those, about 1,100 of them were actually volunteers that are just doing there to do their patriotic duty to make sure that we have integrity in our election process. We had, I think it was over 80,000 hours, man hours of time that was spent in what we did. At this stage in time, we have tallied all of the ballots. We've done paper examination on all of the ballots, and that data is still being worked through. The only thing that we have left is we're working through some of the last bits of aggregation to make sure all these numbers are perfect, because we totally understand how much focus is on us right now and how important this is to our country and really to our nation. And we want to make sure that everything we do is as spot on, as accurate as possible.
Thank you very much. I'd like to interject just something at this time that I wanted actually to say in our opening remarks, just for the record, because we do know that there's been some misinformation out there. And we have said from the day one, and I'm glad to see some of my fellow senators here in the audience with us, because it is our entire Republican Senate body that wanted to pursue this. The important thing that we wanted to make sure everybody knew, which we told you as well in the very beginning, is this is not about Trump. This is not about overturning the election. This has never been about anything other than election integrity. This is the epitome of what America stands for. And if we do not have faith and confidence in our electoral process, then everything we do in life is jeopardized. There was a poll that was recently done that 45% of people in Arizona, according to that poll, believe that we have serious problems with our elections. Whether that is true or not, whether they are rumors, unfound accusations, or legitimate problems for whatever reason, as a Senate body, we felt that it was our obligation and our duty to answer our voters, our constituents, answer those questions, and either confirm what they were afraid of or thought or heard, or that we prove that those things were not true so that they could go back to the polls and they could vote with confidence, knowing that their ballot is sacred. I just wanted to make sure that everybody is fully aware that this is all this is about, is an election integrity. And are we following the rules? Are we following the procedures? Have we done everything we possibly can to make sure these are fair, clean, honest elections? If we do find anything, not us, but you as a vendor, if you do find anything of whether we can pass laws that would help ensure that we have more integrity in the future, if our procedures perhaps are lacking in some way, this is a great opportunity for us to be able to say, let's fix that, because that's what the Senate body does. We pass laws. We have accomplished this because the Constitution gives us the right to subpoena information for the purpose of passing laws. And with that information gives us the tools to be able to either tweak existing legislation or create new legislation to make sure that the sanctity is always there. So I just wanted that on the record. Mr. Bennett, I am going to go to you next. I want to hear, thank you so much. You have volunteered your time for many, many weeks here, free of charge. And with your past experience, it was great to have you step up to the plate and offer to be our Senate liaison, particularly since we were still in session and we could not be there. Because of your expertise as being a past Secretary of State of Arizona and a Senate President prior to me, I would like to get your take, and we would like to know what happened when the ballots arrived, what was the process you observed, and help us walk through that stage. So I'm turning it over to you at this point.
Okay. And I should start probably by thanking others who have assisted me in the liaison process. Julie Fisher, Randy Pullen, John Brakey, Brandon Slayton, and probably others have been a tremendous help in overseeing this process and interfacing between the Senate and the audit. So I'll speak primarily to the chain of custody. We received the ballots and the equipment on 2 days, April 21st and April 22nd of this year. The equipment arrived mostly on the 21st, and I think there were a couple pallets that came with the ballots on the 22nd. I want to give compliments to Maricopa County. They were very professional in the transfer of the chain of custody from them to us. Co-elections Director Scott Jarrett was very professional, along with several of his staff that helped in that process. We received 1,691 boxes of mostly ballots, but other items. And with Mr. Jarrett and his staff's help, we worked through every one of those and checked every box. We worked through some minor discrepancies that we resolved. There were 26 mismarked boxes. There were 8 boxes present on the ballots that were not on the manifest. There were a couple boxes on manifests that were not present. I think there were 3 boxes that were on different pallet numbers than the manifest indicated they were, but we located them on other pallets. Of those 1,691 boxes, they arrived on 46 pallets. 2 of the boxes were data cards, hard drives, fobs, other things that we transferred over to Ben Cotton's group for the data analysis. In the process of doing the audit, some personally identifying information was discovered in 2 boxes, kind of stuffed in with the ballots. I think it's the kind of the practice of a county as large as Maricopa, where you have multiple, thousands of boxes. They have to make sure that those boxes are filled to the brim, so that if that box ends up on the bottom row of a pallet and there's 4 stacked on top of each other, that they can hold the weight. So they kind of build bricks, as one of my assistants kind of calls it, where you make sure that the boxes are full. And in a couple of the boxes we found a variety of counter slips, I think was the first box that we ran into. And the auditors took great care in making sure that no personally identifiable information was compromised. So we took personally identifiable information out of 2 boxes and segregated those in their own 2 boxes. We found personally identifiable information in the spoiled ballot boxes, and that ended up creating 16 new boxes of PII, as we called it. In 2 of the Braille ballot boxes, we found UOCAVA ballots and even some other ballots. I think Doug might talk to that in a little more detail as to the number of those. But so we separated those, and that created 2 more boxes. And then eventually, Cipher, after going through the equipment, returned the 2 data boxes that they had. So we went from 1,691 boxes at the beginning to now we have 1,711 boxes on 47 pallets. As far as the equipment, we received the 9 high-volume scanner machines, 4 called High Pros and 5 Canons, 20 adjudication stations, 4 EMS workstations, and the EMS server, along with some other miscellaneous equipment. That was on 16 pallets. Again, we received that on April 21st. Every pallet and every box on the pallet was co-signed by Mr. Jarrett and myself, as were the 1,691 boxes that I mentioned earlier. We also received 385 precinct tabulators. Those were on 24 pallets. Well, not pallets, I guess you would call them racks or rolling carts. And so we identified each and every one of those by serial number. The 9 high-volume machines, adjudication station, the 20 adjudication stations, the 4 EMS workstations, and the EMS server. Mr. Cotton's company collected the forensic data off those, and he'll speak to how they did that to make sure that none
Mr.
of
Benner, if I could just
Yes.
interject, could you tell everybody what EMS
I'm sorry.
stands for?
EMS is the election management system.
Okay, thank you.
Ben will speak to how they collected that data using equipment that could read only and do no damage to the original evidence that the copies were made from. But the high volume machines, the adjudication stations, the election management system workstations and servers were returned to the county on April 30th. So we had the equipment about 9 days, or at least those pieces of equipment. We would have returned the other 385 precinct tabulators, but I think Ben will speak to that as well. We still do have the precinct tabulators. Both the equipment and the ballots were in locked cages during the entire time that we have possessed the ballots and equipment with limited access. I think most of the time there are probably maybe 2 people that had keys to the ballot corrals, we call them.
Armed security outside every time.
Yeah, we also had 24-hour guarded armed security, both inside and outside of the building. We had 24/7 live stream on the ballots and the equipment during the entire time that they've been in our possession. Doug spoke earlier that that's a very significant part of the 2 petabytes or whatever you said was of data that we have collected. While we have had the machines and the ballots in our custody, we have continuous and complete chain of custody on every box and every machine. Even and especially during the time when we had to move over to the Wesley Boland building and store the ballots and machines while the Coliseum was used for the high school graduations, the return back to the Coliseum, and now we're back at the Wesley Boland. But during all that process, we have had continuous and complete chain of custody while everything has been in our possession. It was shown on the video that every time a box moved somewhere on the floor, it was signed out by somebody in the corral to somebody who took it to a table. It was received at that table by signature. So every time a box moved, 2 people signed for it, and then the reverse when it was returned. And just kind of for your information, when we returned these boxes, most of what we received were boxes sealed with regular packing tape. I think there were 52 boxes that were used in the hand count audit by Maricopa County that were sealed with tamper evident tape, but the other 1,600 and some odd boxes were just sealed with regular packing tape. It's our intent and commitment that when we return everything to Maricopa County, that we will reseal the boxes. And as the video stated, we've gone to great lengths to make sure that the same ballots that were in the boxes when we received them are in the same boxes when we return them. And I think in the same order that we found them. When we close these boxes in the next few weeks and return them to Maricopa County, we will do so with tamper evident tape to seal the boxes, and then a numbered seal across the top opening that will be recorded with each box, so that there's a tamper evident tape and a numbered seal that will be on every box that we return. And I think that speaks primarily to the chain of custody. At some point when we talk about things that maybe we ought to be considering as far as statutory changes or improvements, I can talk about some of the things that the Election Procedures Manual of the State of Arizona and our state statutes require as far as the storage and security of ballots.
Can we go ahead and do that
wanna do
now,
some of that?
since we're on
Okay.
the subject of chain of custody and storage?
Well, one of the things that we subpoenaed that has not been provided is the chain of custody that should have been created when ballots were received by Maricopa County and while they were going through the process of the election. If you go to Chapter 8, I think it's 5, Roman numeral 5, subsection E, storage and security of ballots, it reads that official ballots must be inventoried upon receipt and prior to distribution to voting locations. Item 2 is they must be accessed by election staff only to the extent necessary to perform their authorized task. A key one, though, is 3rd, they must be stored in locked, secured location that prevents unauthorized access, as we have done. And in that number 3, it says it must be documented with a written log or with electronic keypad access that indicates the date, time, and identity of the person accessing the ballots. 4th, must be witnessed by 2 or more election staff members of different political parties if possible when being moved or transferred, which includes an inventory of the ballots before and after the move or transfer. And then the last item is very important as well, since we use ballot-on-demand printers in many of the counties around Arizona, that the officer in charge of elections shall also implement reasonable security procedures for auditing and accountability of blank ballot stock for use with on-demand printers. So part of what we have been trying to get, in addition to the ballots themselves, is a chain of custody from the very beginning of the process when the county took ballot stock and or pre-printed ballots from their vendors, and a chain of custody ever since then, which is still forthcoming.
That was on the original subpoena,
Yes.
and we have not received it.
Mm-hmm.
Madam President, just if I may, Mr. Bennett, what's been the response when you've asked for that? What did the county tell you?
They've provided us what they're going to provide us with.
Okay.
So are you saying they're refusing to give
Yeah.
us that information at this point?
Every time I've tried to interact with the folks at the elections department, I've been told that I need to deal with the county attorney's office, and most of that time I've received kind of the answer that we gave you everything we're going to give you.
Okay.
I'm trying not to be flippant, but that's...
We appreciate that. Can you, as the past Secretary of State, I know you're familiar with the handling of ballots. I know that, a couple of months ago, Senator Peterson and I had our first update briefing, and there were some things mentioned about bags that are sealed at some point and apparently unsealed at some point. There were boxes that you opened and there were broken seals at the bottom. Could you explain, to the best of your ability, how are ballots supposed to be handled and treated from when they're at the voting centers or at the polling stations, and how, when you receive those ballots and you open those boxes, what did you find? Could you walk us through what we should be looking for?
Well, in many of the boxes, we found pretty much a very little existence of any ballot batch sheets that would describe how many ballots should be found in their batches. Maricopa County processed the election in 10,341 batches. Most of their batches were right around 200, but they had 20-some batches that were one ballot per batch, and they had other batches of ballots, mostly from the voting centers, that were around 1,000 in a batch. Some of the boxes, you would see a batch number on the outside of the box, identifying it as election day, so it came from a polling location. And if there was just one number, then you would infer from that there's only one batch in there, and it was a large batch from a voting location. As ballots are processed at the voting locations, I think Maricopa had 171, I believe, voting centers. When those are processed, they're bagged and locked in sealed bags and sent down to the central counting location. They are opened again there, and when they are put in the boxes, we found some of the cut seals and things like that. So the fact that we found some cut seals was probably, it was easier to throw them in the bottom of the box than throw them in the trash can somewhere, and it doesn't speak to anything violative of state law or election procedures manual, but That apparently is the way that some of the people disposed of the seals that came from the bags at the voting centers. The ballots that are handled at the central count, which is the vast majority of the ballots in Maricopa County's situation, of the 2.1 million, or actually 2,089,563 ballots that were processed, approximately 1.9 million were processed through the mail and therefore at central count locations, and about 168,000 ballots were processed at the other, at the 171 polling locations. When those ballots are put in those boxes, in some cases we found pink sheets. We and they, Maricopa County, called them that would say below this pink sheet there should be 200 ballots, but 2 were taken to duplication, and so there should be 198. As was reported earlier, and I think Doug may speak to it again, there were some discrepancies, or quite a few discrepancies found, but it was later discovered that the county has blue sheets that are used at a different point in the process to identify a time in their process where ballots are again sent to duplication. And so the blue sheets explain that the pink sheets would go from 200 to -2 to 198. A blue sheet might get you from 198 to, we sent another 6 or 7 to duplication, so the number would change again. But
Madam President, Mr. Bennett, to that point, what were you given the blue sheets? Have we been
No.
given the blue sheets?
we were not given the blue sheets by Maricopa County, but we were able to get the blue sheets through one of the assistant liaisons organizations, Audit USA out of Tucson, who requested by public records request the blue sheets,
Okay.
and then provided those to the audit, and I think they've been helpful. Doug may speak to that a little further as to explaining some of the discrepancies that are not entirely explained by the pink sheets that we sometimes found in the box. Sometimes we would open a box and all the pink sheets would be stuffed down the side vertically, and you really at that point had no idea of where you would insert those pink sheets in between batches of ballots to account for the sum of the ballots in the box. I think a lot of this may stem from standard procedure where we've not done many audits, and most counties have put things in boxes knowing that they're going to be sealed up, put on pallets, shrink wrapped, and put in a warehouse for 22 months and then destroyed. And usually nothing or nobody's ever being looked at or looking at them. In this case, I think we have discovered that we could probably use a little beefing up in our election procedures manual and or state statutes as to how things are documented and stored in an organized, consistent fashion in boxes in case other audits are done in the future. But there's no, I can find no election procedures manual directives or state law that says you have to put them in the boxes in this specific way, but that may be something that we need to look at.
Anything else that you want to add at this point? We'll have
Only
a
other
chance to
thing,
come back with you if you do need.
Yeah, the only other thing I guess that I was personally involved in on a couple of, not the only other thing, but an other thing that I was called to one of the counting tables is when we started opening duplicate ballots. There was almost one whole pallet of ballots that were called original/damaged ballots sent to duplication. And then there was quite a few boxes, mostly on one pallet, but scattered amongst 3 or 4 other pallets where the duplicates were supposedly there for the duplicates that were sent to duplication. So if a ballot gets damaged and has to be sent to duplication, there is a very specific process in the Election Procedures Manual, Chapter 10, Roman numeral 2, Section 3, Procedures for Duplicating a Ballot. This stems precisely from ARS 16621A, which says that they are to record an identical serial number on both the original and duplicate ballot, including spoiled duplicates. This ties the ballots together and creates a paper trail as required by the statute ARS 16621A. We found, I would have to say, thousands of duplicate ballots where those serial numbers are not on them. And so it has created great difficulty to try to match up a duplicated ballot to its duplicate. And on thousands of the ones that a serial number was put on, they were put on by a, I guess you would call it like a dot matrix printer, very, very light. And unfortunately, they ended up being printed on the ballot on the top, usually top right part of the ballot, where the black square alignment marks are on the ballot. And so if a very light gray number is printed on little black boxes that are a quarter of an inch apart, you see one number and you miss the next, and you see the number and you miss two, and it made for some very difficult matching of duplicated ballots and their duplicates, which, as I just read to you, one of the most important things you need to do when you duplicate ballots is reflect a serial number on both the duplicate and the duplicated, so that you can do two main things. One, make sure you have one for every one of the other, and two, make sure that you can look at the votes reflected on the duplicated ballot and make sure that they reflected those correctly from the ballot that was damaged and was duplicated. So without those serial numbers, it gets very difficult. We found some nice bright red serial numbers on many, but some very difficult to deal with light black numbers on many others, and none whatsoever on many others.
If the corresponding numbers aren't on there, how would you know whether it was duplicated once or 10 times?
You wouldn't.
Okay, thank you.
Unless you meticulously kept track of the total number in each group, which I think Doug's organization has done,
Okay.
to see if the totals match at least.
You said that when we return these ballots, I'm hoping that you guys and will help make sure that they are given to the Arizona County Treasurer. It's my understanding
Maricopa County Treasurer.
Right, the Maricopa County Treasurer. It's my understanding that our statutes say that they're supposed to be turned over to the Treasurer at a certain point, and they were not. Are you well aware of that as well?
Yes.
Yes, okay. When we return those, you mentioned that you were going to put tamper evidence tape with a numbered seal on that.
Mm-hmm.
You also mentioned that everything you have done, you have put back in order, and you mentioned everything has been filmed with all of these petabytes of stuff. So if anybody opens those boxes, we will know that somebody has opened those boxes. And everything that you have just said, and if anybody needs to see that themselves upon court order or whatever, we will be able to not only view that on film, video, but we could also go to the physical evidence and break that seal, hopefully under court order, and go directly to exactly where you have said this has happened. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay. Mr. Peterson, Sarah Peterson, I'll turn this over to you at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, Madam President, I'd like to jump into the cybersecurity, the digital evidence, if I may, if that's okay with you. Mr. Cotton, what so far has been completed for the digital forensics portion of the audit?
So we have completed the forensics acquisition of all of the items that Mr. Bennett just mentioned that were provided to us by the county. And I'd like to take a moment to walk through that process a bit to help everyone understand the forensics fidelity and the standard of care that we took to ensure that there were zero, and I repeat, zero changes to any of the original media or devices.
Okay, go ahead.
So as part of the imaging process, first of all, chain of custody is extremely important, as we previously discussed with the ballots. That standard of care also was transferred into the digital imaging and preservation of that data. So upon receiving each of these digital devices, we filled out an evidence acquisition form that started the initial chain of custody for the acquisition within the digital forensics and analysis piece of this audit. On that form, we carefully recorded all of the serial numbers. We then leveraged what is known in the industry as a write block device. Now, a write block device is used, and as a matter of fact...
How is write spelled?
So write, W-R-I-T-E.
Right, as in write.
As
okay.
in write.
Okay.
And the sole purpose of this device is to prevent any modification of the original evidence that is plugged into it. Okay. This is accepted within our judicial system as the methodology needed to be utilized for anything to be admitted into court and to maintain that standard of care for the digital forensics chain of custody. As part of that acquisition, we then took a bit-for-bit copy, forensics copy, of each of the digital devices. At the end of that copy, we applied what is known as a MD5, a Machine Digest 5 hash value to that acquisition. Now, when you think about that, it is a digital fingerprint of that evidence that we just acquired. If anyone changes even one bit of data within that evidence file, it will totally invalidate the MD5 and create a totally new signature on that particular piece of evidence. Okay, so for every device that Mr. Bennett mentioned that we imaged, we performed that exact process. We know who imaged it, we know when they imaged it, we know where it was imaged to, and that is a controlled item within our evidence and chain of custody handling procedure. We then took those digital copies and we maintain one of those digital copies as primary evidence. And so we locked that away in a U.S. government GSA approved safe to ensure that no one would access it and that it is there as the primary evidence for the basis of our analysis. We then created examination copies that we have used for the determination of the cybersecurity status and other aspects of those systems. Okay, so I must reiterate, not a single bit of data was ever changed on any device that came into our possession.
So, Madam President, Mr. Cotton, are you saying that the machines were not damaged or tampered with in any way where they couldn't be used again? And if they were, you have implemented the people could check and see whether that was done?
Senator, that is correct. So we have exactly a bit-for-bit image of these systems as we received them. Okay, we did not modify, we did not change any chips, we did not access any anything other than the hard drives for those systems. So if there were any changes to the original equipment, those had to have occurred within the custody of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, not with the custody of the auditors.
Okay.
Mr. Peterson, Senator Peterson, may I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Mr. Cotton, well, we're trying to keep this official. Mr. Cotton, recently in the news, I don't know if you have heard or not, but our Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, made a statement a few weeks ago that she would not allow these machines to be used again because she could not verify that we had not, you, not us, you had tampered with them. I don't understand that statement because it is my understanding that when election machines, no matter whose machines they are, that election machines are supposed to be calibrated and certified before any election goes on to make sure that those machines haven't been tampered with, that they are calibrated correctly, and I believe they do that also after an election. So I have this question I don't understand. How can the Secretary of State say that she can't certify the machines weren't tampered with when supposedly we have certified people that come in to certify machines aren't tampered with? It doesn't make sense. Could you explain that to me, please?
Madam President, I certainly understand your confusion, and I share that with you. I'd like to also reiterate that as part of our evidence handling procedure, we had cameras watching over our evidence storage facilities and our acquisition and replication procedures 24/7, okay? So any form of tampering certainly would have been caught on video. However, we did not do anything of the sort that would have interfered with any of the machine configurations or any of the alleged tampering that the Secretary of State has alleged.
Well, Madam President, if I may, just this is more of just, I think, a comment or a statement along with your concern here. And I think this could be something we need to look at legislatively. If we have a process, and from what I've heard, it's about $8,000. You know, the county did an audit for $8,000 or $20,000, whatever it was, to certify and make sure the machines were not tampered with. And this is also part of a process before an election. If that process doesn't work, then, and we're saying that is not valid because somebody doing an audit ruins that and you can't recertify it. It sounds like that we need to have something else. There needs to be another process that works, that you truly, maybe it's the truly certification and verification that machines have not been tampered with process. I don't know what it's called, but anyways, I share your concern. I think that's a good bullet point for us to be looking at for future legislation.
If I also might add, Madam President, that position that they must replace all of the voting equipment is at odds with the public statements that were made by the Maricopa County officials following the two independent audits that they conducted early in this year. Right. So,
And those statements would be what?
those statements would be that they were able to go in and validate that no firmware had been changed, that there was no changes to those systems, and that the election was, in their phraseology, legitimate.
Okay. So, Madam President, if I may just continue on with some of the digital forensics questions here. Can you continue to just tell us with what you've received, what have you received, and what has been done with what you've received so far?
So, Mr. Bennett went through the list of devices that we have received. I would add to that list that he...
Could you just repeat it real quick, just so we
Sure.
kind of
So we have-
compartmentalize it with the digital forensics?
We have received 385 tabulators.
Okay.
Okay, those are the Dominion ICP2s. We have received the county EMS server. EMS, once again, is the election management system. We received their server. We received physical devices correlating to the EMS workstation function, to the adjudication function. We have received 11 hard drives that contained cloned images of various other systems within the EMS ecosystem/network. Of interesting note, however, is on those 11 hard drives which contain cloned data, they did not use a forensically secure process to image those original systems. So the dates and times on those cloned systems were altered by their cloning process. So just as an FYI. With all of the digital devices that we have received, whether in physical or digital form, we have created a forensic copy of each one of those devices as prescribed in the procedures that I just outlined to you. Okay. We have taken those digital forensics copies and we have conducted keyword searching across them, looking for internet connections, looking for anomalous or unauthorized connections into the system. We have conducted searches looking for malware on those systems. We have also created virtual systems of those forensics images to conduct live memory analysis on those virtual systems. And that's where we are today.
So what have we not received from the county that we were supposed to get to be able to do the forensic analysis of?
I think if I'm going to put these in order of criticality, we have not received the router configuration files. We have not received the router data. And Mr. Bennett and myself were in multiple conversations with county officials in which they had agreed to provide that information to us. We had actually entered into a compromise with the county in which they would provide us with virtual access to that data, in addition to providing us with Splunk NetFlow data with a time period of approximately 90 days prior to the election and 60 days after the election. And we had agreed to that. We have not received that due to a response from the county in May stating that they would not provide that because the data would compromise law enforcement operations and would also potentially compromise PII information of Maricopa County residents that had not already been turned over as part of the audit request.
Okay, now tell us the significance of us not, why do you need to look at the routers and the router data and the Splunk logs that they originally told us they were going to give us, and now they have, they're not going to provide that, or they're saying they won't provide that. What's the significance? Why do we need to look at that?
Well, it's critically important to substantiate some findings that we are seeing through the keyword searching and the processes I've already mentioned. There are a number of things that we know as a matter of fact have occurred that we need to further take that information and validate that information. So, for example, we know through public record, public statements, that an element of the election system was actually compromised or breached during the course of the November 2020 election. It is a matter of public statement by Maricopa County as well as legal action and law enforcement action surrounding that particular incident. The registration server that was public facing did have unauthorized access to that. In cybersecurity terms, it was breached. We know that the county has accepted that as an unauthorized breach because they actually issued a letter to a small subset of the voters who were affected by that breach, and they issued that in January of 2021. In that letter, they did acknowledge that there was unauthorized access in November to that server. Okay, so that's one item. The second item is it has become readily apparent in the course of our analysis that there are severe cybersecurity problems with the way the election management system and network was maintained. Okay. For example,
if you give it
for example, if you walk into an average home computer, you will find that the antivirus definitions that protect that system from malware have been updated within the last week. You will find that there have been system security patches sent by Microsoft or by Apple, typically within the last week. Microsoft does it weekly. And you would find that that system is patched and the antivirus definitions are up to date. Sadly, that is not the case for any of the endpoints that we have looked at inside of the Maricopa County election management system. Okay? The last time that the antivirus was updated on these systems was the date that the Dominion software was installed on the systems. That happens to be August of 2019. Okay. There have been no operating system updates or patches on this system since that same date. What that creates is a tremendous vulnerability to anyone who could get access through a system such as if, for example, the registration server was serving as a jump box. In other words, it was dual networks so that it was public facing and also private facing into the election system. If someone accessed that system, they would have no difficulty at all effectively penetrating and gaining system level access at the current patch state and antivirus state of these systems.
So, Madam President, Mr. Cotton, if they could have if they were able to get access, how long would it take somebody to hack in or whatever if they're?
The vulnerabilities that exist on these systems would take an average script kiddie less than 10 minutes to get access to these systems.
Okay, so this is high vulnerability situations.
Correct.
So we need to get the routers. It's clear we need to get the routers. We need, even if it's just a report, they can scan it, they can look at it, they can do whatever they need to do to make it safe. We just need to see the traffic during this election or during this period that you're looking for. Now they've brought up security concerns. Are these? Do you believe these are valid concerns that they brought up from sharing the router traffic or router reports with us? Anything from the router? Are these valid security concerns from your point of view?
They're not, and let me explain why. So when you think about a router, think about someone delivering the mail to your mailbox. Okay. That router is simply the mail carrier, okay? On a standard envelope that you might mail to your mother, you're going to put your return address, you're going to put the address that it's going to, and then you put that in the mailbox. The mail carrier looks at that, they know where to route that, and they will simply route that letter so it's delivered in the mailbox of your mother. With a router, it's very similar. For each packet of data that you have an address to where it's going to, you have an address of where it came from, so that any response can come right back to that system. But what you don't have is the actual content or the letter that's contained in the envelope within the router itself.
Okay, so just to that point, you won't see social security numbers or driver's licenses or sensitive data on this.
You will not.
Okay.
To that point, Senator Peterson? Yes. So when we're talking about the addresses, is this what is known as the IP addresses? Am I on the right track on this?
Yes, ma'am. So it's actually a combination of two elements. One is the IP address, which everyone's very familiar with. But typically on the return side, you will also have what's known as a MAC address. And that is a unique identifier for the communicating device that actually sent the packet. Okay, so for example, if you've got a wireless phone, your wireless modem has a unique MAC address, so that if you're behind a home router or something like that, it will know where to deliver that return packet to.
Okay. One of my concerns, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Please. When we received the letter from Sheriff Penzone stating that we would not get the routers because of a potential security issue, the one thing that stuck in my mind, I just heard you say that there is not a valid security concern there, but just hypothetically, if for some reason they think that there's a security concern, my question is why would they be using the same router as our election systems, as other, if there's even a small remote possibility that they think that somebody could be jeopardized? Why are we sharing routers with other agencies? Why don't they have their own personal secure router?
Ma'am, I can't answer why they shared that space, but once again, this is one of those situations where what they've told the public is drastically different than the apparent reality in response to a legal subpoena. Okay, so from a public response standpoint, Maricopa County officials have repeatedly stated that the election system was a closed system. It did not touch the internet, and therefore, it could not have commingled with the data from the Sheriff's Department or the Maricopa County other office space. The fact that they have responded back to an official subpoena with the justification that to produce that data would compromise these other aspects of the Maricopa County network that does touch the internet is an admission that maybe things aren't like what they've told the American public. Okay.
So, Mr. Cotton, we've talked about the routers, Splunk logs. Again, why do we need the Splunk logs?
So,
and I also want to ask about that. We also, you mentioned, have not received the passwords, the tokens. Why do we need those things?
so if I can address the first part of that question, Senator Peterson. So part of the challenge that we have is that specifically, I'll use the EMS server as an example. The Windows security log, or the Windows security event log, as some people would call that, actually only goes back to the 5th of February of 2021. Now, there are a couple of things.
So after the election.
After the election.
Okay.
So we would need this data to cover and to help fill in the blanks back to the election. Okay. But more importantly, there's an aspect to that security log that bears consideration. And so the security log was set to retain approximately 20 megabytes of data. And the way that works is it operates on a first in, first out principle. As soon as you hit 20 megabytes of data, the oldest entry gets deleted, and the next, and so it just continually rolls like that to maintain the constraints on that data space. When we took a look at this, we found specifically in March, and I believe it was March 11th, there were 37,646 queries for a blank password on a system that only contained 8 accounts. Now, given the short time period that happened, that clearly was a script that was executed by the user EMS admin. Okay. What we don't have, because of the lack of logs and the condition of that system, is where did that script come from? Okay? So by leveraging the router information and by leveraging the Splunk information, I should be able to determine who was using the EMS admin account at that particular time and where did that originate from.
So just to be clear on this, were there 37,000 logins on one day? Is that what you're saying? How would you identify this?
When you're doing a security check on a system, it's very common for you to look for passwords that have a null password or a blank password, right? And so you can query the device itself to let you know whether or not there are any accounts that have a blank password on them.
So it's a query? I'm just looking for what you're calling this.
It's a script, it's a query.
So there's 37,000 queries.
Yes.
And they were done on this one day. And the reason we need the Splunk logs is because those 37,000 queries churned the data so that you can only look back to February 5th, or what was the date?
February 5th.
February 5th.
That is correct.
And obviously we need to go back to the election.
Correct.
We need to be looking at the election day, prior to the election day, looking at access. So we don't have that, what we were given, we don't have that that window, which is the critical window we need to look at.
That is correct.
Okay. So obviously we need the routers, or just the data, and just how about we just start with March 11th, the 37,000 queries. I mean, give us something here. What about the machines, the Dominion machines, the tokens for the machines? Why do we need those?
Okay. So within the administrative functions of the Dominion ICPs, you have basically a couple of different levels or roles, as they call them, inside of the EMS software. The current state, so we have completely recreated a virtual EMS. I am able to burn these little fobs or iButton keys, as they really are, and those give me security access at whatever role I'm permitted to burn inside of the EMS. Currently, inside of the EMS construct, there is only one role, and that is of poll worker. Within the Dominion ICPs, poll workers as a role, even if you give them admin access, do not get access to the configuration of that device itself. So on each of these ICPs, and these are ICP2s, we know that there are 2 NIC cards. We know that they can be configured with wireless modems. We know that they can be configured with cellular modems. So the purpose of requiring this information is to get a configuration for each of those systems that shows how they were configured, what is enabled, what is not enabled, and more importantly, I can get the MAC addresses for each of those devices. Now, if you recall our previous conversation on the router data, where you have an IP address, you have a MAC address. It then becomes a very simple process to say, did any of these MAC addresses ever touch the internet? It's very simple.
So it sounds like Maricopa County does not have access to this. Dominion only has access to this. Why is it important for Maricopa County to be able to have access to this?
Well, your assumption appears to be true. So when we asked them for the administration level fobs, we received a response back to within the same letter as the router data, saying that they had provided us everything that they have access to, and the inference obviously there is that only the contract Dominion employees, contracted by Maricopa County, have access to configure those ICPs and to get access to the configuration or technician aspects of those ICPs. Now, where this becomes important is that if you as a county cannot validate the configuration independently of the vendor, then how do you ever validate an election system that it's safe to vote? Okay? Because you don't know. As a county, it's responsible to validate and certify those systems prior to a vote. Okay? So I would suggest that at this point, based on the evidence that has been provided to me, that the Maricopa County officials do not have the ability to independently verify the configurations of their systems without using Dominion employees.
So, Madam President, so again, I think this is just kind of another bullet point for us, something for future legislation. We always want to make sure, I think, that, and if this is the case, this is just with what we've been able to see so far, perhaps, and we'd love to hear from the county on whether they can. If they do have access, then great. If the county can get this administrative access, where they can, look at the tabulators. We want to make sure that the state, the county, can always be at a higher level of administration than these third parties that we're using, so that it's us doing the elections, it's the county doing the elections. So this, I think, is another thing that we need to make sure that we address. Either now get we need to get a response of that they do have access to this and they can, audit this themselves and control this, or this is something that we need to make sure in the future that we are able to do.
Question? And I don't know that you have an answer, but I'm going to throw it out and maybe we can put it on our list of questions to ask. Originally, the Board of Supervisors had agreed to do a forensic audit with us, which is what we wanted. We did not want the ballots moved. We would not want the machines moved. And that's the path I thought we were going on until they went into an executive session and said they were going to do their own audits using 2 companies that are authorized to certify the machines. And so they did these 2 audits. One was Pro V&V, one was SLI. Thank you.
Yeah.
Those 2. If they had done the audit, as Senator Peterson said, why did they not come up with this information and report it as well? I don't know that you'd have an answer. It's
Probably can't speak for their company.
I can't speak to what their scoping was. I would suspect that a full cybersecurity audit was not part of their scoping. That's what I would surmise. But the reports that were produced by both of those audit firms clearly did not address the cybersecurity aspects that we have found. And there's another finding that you would think that any audit firm would be looking at, and that is commonality of passwords. So what we have found is that for all the administrative accounts, no matter what the name of that account was, they shared the same password. Okay? Now, that password appears to have been established at the same time that the Dominion software was installed on these systems, which August of 2019, and does not appear to have been changed during that entire time period. Okay. So once again,
And so to that point, what would be the what would be the recommendations with what's the industry standard with passwords and recommendations with password, best practices with that?
well, first and foremost, the shared password eliminates one of the very critical items of cybersecurity, and that is we cannot attribute the actions of a given username back to an individual. Because these were all shared passwords, literally anyone who had any access to any admin account could have been able to use any other admin account. So accountability is out the window, right, from an individual aspect. From a cybersecurity standpoint, it is
Now, just to be clear, when we're talking about these passwords, these are the passwords for the server. This is not the machine admin password you're talking. Which passwords are you talking about here?
We're talking about the EMS admin password. We're talking about the adjudication admin password.
So this is not the Dominion machine, the
Operating system password.
This is the EMS, meaning the election servers, not
So-
the Dominion tabulators or machine.
There is a correlation between the Dominion Windows accounts and the Dominion functions. So you can't separate the two. In other words, when you log into the EMS server, for example, you will enter in the EMS admin username, and then you'll enter in a password. Okay, that provides you single sign-on access into all of the functions of the EMS software. So these two things are tied together.
Right, but what I'm trying to make sure that's clear for people to understand is that you do have the admin password for the server, correct?
Correct.
But you don't have the admin password for the tokens for the Dominion machines.
A little bit of a correction there. I do have the admin passwords. What I don't have is the authentication fob because it requires both of those items.
Right.
So we were able to recover the admin passwords used for the tabulators, but because we don't have the ability to burn that iButton fob.
It's like an additional layer of security.
Correct. It's a multi-factor
for
authentication
those,
into the tabulator.
And it appears that only Dominion has that.
Correct.
From what we know so far.
Correct.
From the information we have so far. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Madam
Right,
President.
anything else that you wanted to add that's not covered at this point?
I think that there is one other critical aspect of why I need the Splunk logs. So, anonymous logins are a normal part of Windows activity. So if you've ever accessed a shared file in Windows, that's called an SMB share. And as part of that request, there will be an anonymous logon action to the server that has the share file on it. And then that is followed immediately by the authentication of the user that is requesting that access. As part of the course of that normal anonymous action, the Windows logs will actually record the username that is requesting that action. It will record the IP address that is originating the request, and it will record the host name of that originating client. What we are seeing here, and what does require additional correlation with NetFlow data, is we're seeing anonymous logins at the system level that do not follow that pattern of normal Windows behavior. Okay, and so we need to have that additional data to validate what that activity is.
Thank you. All right, ready to move on to the next section? Sorry, this is tedious, but there's a lot of information that we're trying to absorb and understand here, so bear with us, please. I'm going to go back to Mr. Logan at this part. Mr. Logan, we would like you to help us address the issues that you're having with the hand counting of ballots, the paper examination, and then we'll move into voter data analysis and envelopes. So let's start with the hand count of ballots and where we're at on that.
So there's been a lot of questions, I know, about the timeline and why some things have taken a little bit longer than expected. I have to say that every audit I've ever been a part of, usually whatever the organization is that you're working with, is available to answer questions or run ideas by and to get some feedback on findings. And that's one of the more difficult things with this audit is to not have that feedback loop and not be able to ask questions on things that could be solved very quickly.
From Maricopa County.
Correct, from Maricopa County. Specifically, we've run into I think Ken Bennett was stating earlier about some of the duplicated ballots. Specifically, we've had a lot of problems with the way that those were were recorded and the way they were received over. I think probably the best way to do this is go over, I think it's actually Exhibit B, if you can put that up on the screen. Is it? Actually, can you zoom in so people can see that a little better? Okay. So what we have here on the top of the screen is the original manifest on one of the boxes that held duplicate stuff in it. You can see all the numbers, the MC 17416 and so forth. So that was what was stated was given to us. If you take a look at the table below it, and actually if you can just zoom in a little more maybe to make it a little more clear. And we don't need the top part anymore, you can scroll down. So on the actual manifest, the far left column has the manifest batch number. And then if you look right next to it, there's actually what the observed batch number was within it. You'll notice that the first few ones are actually correct. But then you get down to MC 171634, which is about halfway down. You notice that its naming convention is as if it is an original, but it is actually a duplicate. And just to step back a little bit to give a little bit of clarity, anytime there is a ballot that can't be run through the tabulator, whether that's because it's damaged, whether it's because it's something like a Braille ballot or something like UACAVA, any of the other forms, they actually have to create duplicates of it that are then run through the tabulators.
Can you tell us what UACAVA stands for, please?
Uniform Overseas Citizen Absentee Voter Act.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. In any case, so you have the original ballots, and then you have the duplicates, and there was roughly 50,000 total, so there's 25,000 originals and roughly 25,000 duplicates, assuming that they all matched up with that. So in order to make sure that things are not double counted and things are attributed properly, it's very important to be able to match them up. In fact, this is why there's statute that says there's supposed to be a serial number on the original that you can match up with the serial number on the actual duplicate. So one for one that they were counted properly, and from an audit standpoint, we want to make sure that the original is exactly the same as the duplicate. So it's important to us to make sure that we can match those. So when we receive a manifest that states that stuffs were originals, when we actually start looking through them, we realize that they're duplicates. It creates things that are a lot more complicated and difficult for us. So that these are some of the examples in here. You'll see that there's a whole bunch of things that were wrong where we were stated. There's several things on there that were not listed on the manifest that were actually in the box. There's one of them that was actually on the box that wasn't really in the observed, that was on the manifest that wasn't actually found in the box. We had within the Braille ballot box that was labeled as Braille ballot, we had other types of ballots that were found in there that were not expected to be in there. So it makes things much more difficult. And moving on to, actually, if you scroll down, you should see Exhibit C.
Okay. You might need to speak into the mic a little bit more,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Logan.
So what we have here is we actually took a few examples out where serial numbers really should be unique. There should be one original ballot with a serial number and one ballot which is the duplicate of it with the same serial number. When you take a look at this chart, the first column is the box ID. That's the box that it came out of. And then you take a look at the next column, it'll tell you whether it's a type, what the type is. Dupe means it's a duplicate. DSD it means that it is actually the original ballot. And you'll notice that the last column is a serial number, but they're in groups of 3, which shouldn't really happen. So we have 2 original ballots that have the same exact serial number, and we have only one that was duplicated from it. And these are just a handful of examples that we have that go through it. And so we have a whole bunch of ballots that also don't have any serial number of them, so it's quite possible that for the second one with the same serial number, there's another one that matches up with it that literally doesn't have a serial number on it. But it creates a lot of time and difficulty in resolving these issues when it was not done in a manner where it's easy to match up and really according to my understanding of what statute it is and what statute states. Not an attorney, but Ken Bennett can probably speak a lot more.
I'm not one either.
But you know the statutes really well.
So just to be clear on this, Madam President, I think, so this is some of the delay, I guess, so some of why it took so long to put these all together or trying to assimilate this, because you've got this kind of confusion and
Correct.
And with Maricopa County refusing to answer any questions as to help us understand what you did here.
And
right?
there may be some explanation as to how and why serial numbers get duplicated. It doesn't seem like a good practice any way that you look at it, but if it's well documented and there's some easy way for things to be audited, then you're in good shape. But that's one of the problems we've run into, is that so many of the issues we've encountered through things makes it very difficult, if not impossible, in order to audit things. And it's our goal in going through there to give some irrefutable proof to make sure that we know that things were solid or that they're not. And these types of problems make it very difficult for us to be able to say absolutely on certain aspects.
Continue. Is that everything on the hand count ballots?
I believe that's everything in hand counts.
Okay, would you like to move on to paper examination issues that you need answers to?
Yes, please. Okay. So we utilized kinematic artifact detection in order to take a look at all of the ballots in order to process to figure out how they work and how they function. And if we can actually get Exhibit D up, please. Go ahead and scroll down. So on every single, I had it mislabeled as E, but it's actually D. Ballots are designed as such so that when you fill out one side of the ballot, it's very important that that if you fill out a bubble, it does happen to bleed through. It doesn't do so in a manner that would actually impact the way the vote was cast. So ballots are designed in the manner to make that so. In order to make sure they're actually aligned, on one side of the ballot, there is the circle and X's that you see in this. And on the other side of the ballot, there's actually printed a cross. And when a ballot is properly aligned, that cross will actually line up perfectly. If you backlight it, this cross will actually line up perfectly. And that's actually the image you're looking at. We have a backlit image of a ballot, and you're seeing in the front side the circle and the cross, and the inside it's very similar to, say, like a gun sight. Now, if you look carefully at that top image, you'll actually notice that it's a little bit offset. Based on standards, that's actually the maximum it's supposed to be offset for a ballot to be viewed as valid and processed, so there aren't any issues with it. If you take a look at that image down at the bottom, you'll notice that it's 1900%. This is actually something from an actual ballot out of Maricopa County that we ran into, where it was out of calibration. And just to give a little bit more perspective, if we scroll down in the PDF to the next section, we actually have two batches here. We're still running this process through all the batches, but this graphic, you want to be in the bullseye. The bullseye in the center is actually the check marks on how offset those things should be. And just to be specific, from a calibration standpoint, I think it's supposed to be within 100% of in it, and we made our box about 300%. From the way this is calibrated. And you'll see that the average is actually, take on the top right-hand corner, the average on this is actually 1,024%, and the worst ballot was 3,200%. You can see there's two different batches that we have in here as examples. Now,
Madam President, Mr. Logan, so what happens to these ballots? What's if this happens, if they're off, the reading off, then what's the result?
Okay,
how is this dealt with in an election?
So if you actually go to the next exhibit, we'll talk through that here. So if they're offset, what it means is if it bleeds through, it can potentially cause an overvote. It can potentially cause you to vote for someone that you intend to vote for, or so forth, because the bleed of one side's bubble can go so forth to the other side and get within the area would be categorized for the other bubble. Now, specifically, we should not have had problems with bleed through. If you scroll down a little bit farther and zoom in where we've got the red box, this is actually a newsletter that was put out by Maricopa County that talks about the paper types that are utilized. And specifically, they state that they use vote secure paper. Now, if vote secure paper is utilized, it's actually a thick paper. It has a special coating on it that helps make sure there isn't bleed through. And so it would help ensure that bleed-through wouldn't be a problem, even if things happen to be not perfectly calibrated. But if you scroll down to the next page, we're going to give you an example of an actual ballot where you can see the bleed-through that goes through. And you can see that the bleed-through is actually very, very close to where votes are cast. Now, as part of additional analysis, we're going to try to get a better idea as to when or if this did impact votes and did impact values. It does require additional analysis in here. But specifically, this is an indication of problems that could cause an overvote situation or could cause votes to be cast for a different candidate than intended.
So let me clarify something. I want to make sure I get this straight, because this was an issue early on, right after the election. So Maricopa County, you're saying on their website, said that they only use secure paper, which does not allow for bleed-through. Correct?
Correct. This is actually a newsletter from them, but yes.
Okay, their newsletter. And so if that is correct, there is no way there would be bleed-through as what we're seeing on the ballots.
Yeah, based on our discussions with paper experts, they specifically state that that paper is thick enough that it wouldn't bleed through, and we are seeing a lot of very thin paper stock being utilized, especially on election day.
Okay. Was this done with, does this happen with just magic markers, or does it happen with ballpoint pens? Do you know that answer? I don't want to put you on the spot, but...
I would expect that, with Sharpies, the bleed-through would be greater, but it could potentially happen to a lighter amount with regular ballpoint pens as well. Yeah.
Okay. So there was in fact, it was dubbed by some of the media Sharpie Gate at the very beginning, and there were the Maricopa elections people came back and said, no, if there was any bleed-through, it would not have affected other votes because it's not lined up. Are you saying that's true or not true?
We would need more analysis, and their final report will be able to tell you more clearly whether this impacted things or not. But definitely, if there was an offset that was in the right direction, the right way, and there was bleed through, it could definitely impact the ballot.
Okay. One more question. Going back to this one on this phase right here, the pictures you had, what would cause that X or that mark to be out of that far of alignment? What causes that?
So if the printer is not properly calibrated, when it prints the second side of the page, it's actually offset, so it's not perfectly aligned. So it could be a number of different things involved, and probably printer calibration would be the key thing for it.
So would this be printer calibration with the people that printed the ballots, the main ballots, and aren't there printers like at the voting sites that they can print?
Yeah.
So it could be any of those printers?
So most of from what I understand, most of the ballots that were printed at Runbeck, that we can confirm with Runbeck, were pretty much spot on. But there's a lot of ballot on demands that are printed at the actual voting centers, and those had large offsets.
Do we know how many ballots on demand there were or not? Is there any records of
So
those?
it'd be roughly 168,000, which would be the election day ballots.
So those were all ballots on demand?
Yeah, we are seeing more than that where this offset occurred. And so we're trying to drill into what printers and where and what that's tied to.
Okay, thank you. Okay, continue. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I think that was everything.
Okay.
To cover.
So let's go to, let me back up to the paper examination issue too. How do we verify, so Maricopa County is saying we only use 4 types of paper and they're all secure, and we're saying they're not. How do we prove that? What is the best way to get that documentation to say what the truth really is? Can you help me with that?
Yeah, certainly. We can request information on the purchasing of paper that was utilized for ballots, what their quantities were and where they were utilized. We can get information on what printers were utilized at different locations, and all of that can help tie together to make more sense out of the information we have.
Great, thank you. Would you be able to make a list of that for me so that we can try and ask for that information for you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Let's go to what we call voter data analysis, and because this ties in directly with the canvassing, our contract, the Senate contract with you, and your proposal for work, one of those items was canvassing to be able to actually verify if you found any information, and the only or best way to verify it is to actually go to that person. And I've always used the example because I do know of a case where one house got 25 ballots in the mail and only 2 people lived there. And so we had talked about how do we verify that, and there was a question about canvassing. Department of Justice sent us a letter about 4 or 6 weeks ago and said, we're concerned about you actually knocking on doors, that you might, might be voter intimidation or civil rights violation or something, which I find is interesting after the White House last week said we're going to knock on doors to see whether you're vaccinated or not. But that's a side point, just a little side point. But so we told the Department of Justice that we would postpone that indefinitely until your audit was at a point where we could even determine whether that was going to be necessary or not. So can you talk to us about that, and is it going to be necessary? Is it not? Go into that part for me, please.
Yeah, based on the data we're seeing, I highly recommend we do the canvassing, because it's the one way to know for sure whether some of the data we're seeing, if it's real problems or whether it's clerical errors of some sort. So for example, we have 74,243 mail-in ballots where there is no clear record of them being sent. And just to be clear, here in the state of Arizona, there's EV32s and EV33s. EV32s is supposed to give a record of when a mail-in ballot is sent, and an EV33 is supposed to give a record of when the mail-in ballot is received. And so there should be an equal, there should be more EV32s, more sent out than there are that are received. Specifically with these, we can tie them to a specific individual that was mailed to. And so we have 74,000 where we have them came back from individuals where we don't have a clear indication that they were ever sent out to them. That could be something where documentation wasn't done right. There was a clerical issue. There's not proper things there. But I think when we've got 74,000, it merits knocking on a door and validating some of this information.
So, Madam President, if I may, Mr. Logan, what are you looking at where you see this, where there's 72,000 received but not 72,000 sent? What did you guys look at to come up with that?
So there was information that was FOIA'd from the county, specifically in these EV32 and EV34 or 33 forms. And that is what gives an account of what was sent out and what was received back.
This is the data you received from a FOIA request back
correct.
From the county.
Members of our team received back, correct.
And you're saying that the EV33, which is the number of ballots received, was higher than the number of ballots.
We are not seeing an equivalent EV32 to go along with EV34. Or 33, I'm sorry, it keeps doing this up.
32 and 33.
32 and 33, we're not seeing them where they match up, because there should be a matchup of them. Obviously, you're going to have more mail-in ballots sent out than are ever returned, but specifically, these should match up with each other.
Okay.
Is there another way to get that information? How would you verify that? Is there another way to get that information if what you have seen so far doesn't make sense? How can we verify? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, we could request information from the U.S. Postal Service on what was, went through the mail system. There's additional records about if mail-in ballots were in fact rejected and returned. That information, would be useful in sorting through some of this as well. There's a number of different things associated with artifacts that are created when mail-in ballots are sent.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
Okay. So we have also seen some interesting things related to the voter rolls. So for example, we have 11,326 people that did not show up on a November 7th version of the voter rolls that should have been after votes were cast, but then appeared on the December 4th voter rolls. And just be clear, they show as voted in this past election, but they were not a November 7th version of the file, and they did show up on the December 4th version.
Okay, that sounds confusing. Give me an explanation of why that might have, we're not saying there's fraud, we're not saying anything else. I'm just trying to find answers. Is there a logical explanation why that would be?
I cannot think of a logical explanation on what that would be, but it'd be a great thing to hear back from the county to see if there's anything that we're not thinking of.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
So we have, from what I understand here in Arizona, Hobbs had requested that the registration date for voting be moved up to election day, and there was actually a court case that moved it back to October 15th. based on the registration information that we found in the voter rolls, we have 3,981 individuals who show as having voted in this election, and their data shows up in the canvas as having voted in this election. However, they were registered after October 15th.
So what we would need is, again, so all of these, Madam President, so all of these are things that canvassing we could find out, did they register before, did they even vote, or we need some more data, we need more data from the county to show they registered before that date, something showing that they registered before October 15th, or something showing that these, their ballots were sent out to people where they were received. Or we need to do a canvass. We need to be doing canvassing to ask the voters themselves.
Okay, continue.
The last one I have is we have roughly 20,000, I think it was about actually closer to 18,000, who voted in the election and then showed as being removed from the voter rolls soon after the election. So they were on the voter rolls, they showed as voted, and then they were removed. And there could be a good logical explanation for that, but it seems like a large number to immediately have after an election be removed. And so getting more documentation on the request to remove from voter rolls or other process to make sure that makes sense seems logical. In addition, again, knocking on doors and canvassing can help validate that information.
Okay. Mr. Bennett, besides knocking on doors, how would we also obtain that information? Secretary of State, voter rolls, Maricopa County, or knocking on doors is the only way to do it? I don't understand.
Well, the original voting records are kept at the county level. That is shared electronically on a daily basis with the Secretary of State's office. It keeps a statewide voter database. The Secretary of State's office receives information from vital records and other courts and et cetera, that is then in kind of reverse sent to the county levels to let the counties know who's died, who's been adjudicated in a court hearing as being incompetent or lost their voting rights because of a felony conviction or something like that. So I guess we could look at almost daily data between the county and the Secretary of State's office.
All right, thank you. Continue.
That's actually the last thing I have to cover from this section.
Okay. Envelopes, that's an issue that we've been talking about. Would you like to touch on that as well?
Yeah, we've had an affidavit that specifically stated that when mail-in ballots were received, that so many of them were received that the standards reduced over time. They originally talked about there was initially 20 points of comparison on the signature, and then after some time they're told to go to 10 points of signature, 10 points of comparison, then 5, and then eventually they were just told to let every single mail-in ballot through. So we think it's important. Understand with the course of our settlement, the only thing we can look at is blank signatures, but we think it's important to get the mail-in ballot images and see how many, if any, blank signatures came through, because that could have a material impact on the election.
Okay. Do we not have those images of the envelopes?
We do not have those images. Maricopa County has stated that they provided us with images of the envelopes, but specifically the folder they pulled into us on a specific drive has to do with voter registration details. It does not appear to have anything to do with the receiving of ballots. And I believe that, again, Bennett can tell you more about his interchanges with them, but specifically we asked them, so are you saying that in that folder we should have the envelopes that were utilized for ballots to be delivered in this past election? And the answer was basically there's envelopes in that folder, and it did not clearly answer our question.
So, Mr. Bennett, when you asked them or advised them that maybe they're mistaken, they're not here, could you send it again, or what was said?
I would simply recommend, Madam President, that they be re-subpoenaed as almost maybe a separate item and on a separate device, and it's not commingled with other folders or anything else.
But I guess her question is, what has been their response when you asked for? We need the images of the ballots.
Envelopes.
We need the images of the envelopes that were mailed. They said they gave us a file. It's not on the file. When you ask you tell them we don't have those, what is the response? What has the response been to you?
It's on the Lacey 5 terabyte hard drive in a affidavits folder that's 1.83 terabytes big. And we keep looking for it and don't find it.
If I might add, I did an extensive forensic search for the mail-in ballots. The only images that are contained on the referenced Lacey drive are the original voter registration affidavits. Nothing to do with mail-in ballots.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So we will put that on the list of things to ask for. All right, so that brings us right into that list. Mr. Peterson, I'm going to let you take over at this point.
Well, I think, Madam President, you and I just we talked about so you've done a good job of letting us know what we've done, what's completed so far. We've heard a few things that we're missing. The President and I would like to know if you can tell us, just if you can kind of summarize or go through, tell us what do you guys need based off of what you've learned so far to have a complete forensic audit where we can have a complete and final report. So if you can share with us, what are those things that you would need to do that?
I think one of the key things that Mr. Cotton has talked about is we really need the Splunk logs in order to validate there was not any remote access to those systems in order to confirm any type of remote connectivity. And we request
So we've covered that. I mean, anything that hasn't been mentioned already in the hearing. Do you have anything that because we've written, I believe the President and I have written all those things down. Is there anything that we haven't brought up that you would need to make this where you feel like it's a complete audit?
Yeah. So specifically, when we talk about those changes to the voter rolls we talked about, and there's additional things we've seen that have changed in voter rolls over time that should not change. I think it would be very helpful if we could get a full backup copy of the database of voter rolls, specifically with information about who it was that made changes and when, and IP addresses and those details, so we can drill into why it is that some of these changes have taken place. I think we talked about chain of custody already. That's something that's extremely important for us to validate the chain of custody of everything from the point where the first ballot was sent to the point where we received stuff. We have full chain of custody of what we've covered, while it's been in our custody, but we need to know of it prior to that.
Okay.
So we understand that there may be some systems associated with the duplication of ballots that we have not forensically looked at. And as we've seen problems with duplication, if we're able to have access to those, we believe it would be very valuable in seeing what might be going on.
So what do you mean? What are you looking for there?
Well, there's some software, I believe it's called Novus, that's used as part of the duplication process. There was actually a court case, I believe it was Ward via Jackson, where it was discovered that some of that duplication was not properly attributing results for the candidate the original had. And so being able to forensically look at that information would be helpful. And based on some analysis that Mr. Cotton has done, he does not see that within any of the data sets that we currently have. And so the question is whether the original subpoena was worded as such that we should have received that, or whether this is something that needs to be in a new request.
Okay. Anything else?
So any reports associated with the breach that is known about of the voter rolls with Maricopa County, that again will help with investigation that Mr. Cotton is putting together.
To be clear, you're talking about the breach that happened in the Maricopa County, sent letters out to the voters and saying, please be aware our system's been hacked or breached, and
Yes,
we believe none of your personal information has been disclosed. That letter, that breach.
Correct.
Okay.
There's been minimal public information available about that, and any internal reports on what was discovered, the levels of the breach, and how far would be very helpful in our analysis as to whether the voting systems were impacted this election cycle.
Now, you weren't here at the time. I don't know if you know, Mr. Bennett. Do you remember, is this the same breach as the one where the FBI raided that house?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know.
Doug
Yes,
is
ma'am, I
nodding.
believe so.
Mr. Logan, okay.
And, Mr. Cotton, I don't know if you want to chime in.
I
on that.
believe that to be the same.
Okay, thank you.
So specifically, we'd like to request all portable media or external hard drives that contained election definitions, election results, backups, or similar data. We know from photos that we've seen from MTech that there was at least 3 orange drives, of which we received 1 of them. And reviewing the wording of the subpoena, portable media and external drives may not have been included if you were trying to take a very narrow view of what we requested. We believe there will be backups and other information that will be helpful in our analysis on those.
Okay.
So you need us to subpoena the 2 missing orange drives, missing
Well,
drives?
I think we
Or any
worded
any portable
as any
drives.
portable media or external drives that have not been given prior subpoenas.
Okay, thank
They're
you.
associated with the election specifically.
Thank you.
We don't need any of the information we've already seen, so most of this stuff we've put caveats that we don't need things we already received. As we've heard the report that the election department shares a network with the sheriff's department, it'd be very helpful to have the network diagram to show how that is, and from our analysis standpoint, it will make it easier for Mr. Cotton to hone in on what happened, and again, to look at things. I think we already talked about the backups of election management data. Digital copies of all versions of policies and procedures utilized associated with the election would be helpful. We've received verbal reports from a number of people that work for Maricopa County that indicate that some of the things we've seen don't actually comply with Maricopa County's policies and procedures, but without a copy of those, it's difficult for us to validate those. And we want to make sure that any finding we put into our report is something that be irrefutable, and we have the hard evidence to back it up. So getting those policies and procedures would be helpful in doing so.
Question, if I might. Question. Why would those not be public record and already produced somewhere? If they're procedures, election procedures.
Well, some levels of them are public and are available. But when I looked into specifically trying to see some of the ballot storage requirements and how they should be stored specifically as an example, there was not very detailed information. And usually you have guidance from a state, and then within a county they'll have very specific their interpretation of how they execute it. It's one of the reasons why it's so valuable with an audit to be able to have conversations with people, because there's things they do in Maricopa County they don't do that way anywhere else in the country. And not all those are necessarily wrong. It's not about right or wrong. It's just different. So getting their policies and procedures so we know them and we're aware of them is something that's helpful. And some of that information they did send over with the original subpoenas. But there's additional, like I said, when I went through them, there's enough things that we ran through that I couldn't find specific documentation on that we were told they had specific guidance on, and we'd like copies of that.
Okay, so so some through inferences, they're told they know how to do this. Well, how do we know how to do this? It's not in the procedure manuals. We need where they're getting this guidance and training.
Correct.
Okay.
And most governmental organizations have very clear and very precise policies and procedures for pretty much everything that's done. And so it should be something that's easy to procure. So we mentioned before about the blue sheets. Since we received these through another party, we'd like to specifically subpoena them so we know we have the official copies of them. They call them the tabulation logs. That was the official name that they utilized in them. And so that's, again, just to make sure that what we have is valid and real. We have no reason to expect that it's not, but it's just good to get it officially. Tied in with some of the things we ran into on the voter rolls, records of all mailed out ballots, everything that's available as far as what's mailed out and what was rejected, and validation that they were destroyed if they were rejected and came back. I've got a lot of things in here. They're specific to that, but for the brevity, So we'd like copies of all files transmitted for the purpose of duplicating damaged ballots or alternate format ballots, specifically to help us trace some of this information to make sure everything matches up and that it followed appropriately, because for things to be printed by a printer at Runbeck on duplicate ballots, they had to send a request over to them of some format and some data, and we'd like to be able to match that up with everything that we have. We talked about the records of all paper distributed to vote centers and so forth. So additional information associated with adjudication of ballots would be helpful as we do our analysis on those and make sure that that conforms with expectations. That votes were cast over as far as what the process was, who was involved in it, and how they validated things with that. Specifically, we'd like information about the total count of all ballots sent to UOCAVA eligible voters, how they were sent and how they were received, because there's a number of different ways those votes can be received back. And we have some of the numbers with UOCAVA seem a little off, seem a little anomalous, and we'd like to get more documentation on that to make sure that we can have, if there's any anomalies that merit going into a report, that we have the information to know whether it belongs or doesn't. I think that's pretty much everything here. If we're talking about things generically, there's more specifics that I have listed, but.
Okay. Do we have more questions?
I don't at this point. I think I'm going to have to circle back with them to get this list. I won't be able to make heads or tails out of
I'll
my
send you the document.
my quick chicken scratching there. So I'll get a clear. Go ahead.
So I think if you don't have any questions, Madam President, I don't have any more questions. Maybe just some closing statements here. Just back to what you said about working together. It is unfortunate that the county has been recalcitrant. That doesn't breed trust. It slows things down. It makes things difficult. We'd like to work together with them. We'd like to be able to get answers with to questions, and we'd like to get everything we need to finish the audit. More than anything, obviously some of these things can just, they could probably answer. Some of these procedural things, working together, we could just get answers to. But I think there's some really important things that we have been brought up today that we need to get if we want to have a complete, full forensic audit. If we don't get them, it will be an incomplete report. It will be an incomplete audit, and that's what the findings will reflect. So I think in addition to what he's mentioned in additional things, we need to get we've got to get the chain of custody. We have to get the routers or reports. It's safe. Experts say it's safe. Limit the report to what we're asking for or what we're needing. Put it on paper, whatever you need to do. We need to get those logs, and we need to get that report. We need to get the tokens to the machines. We need to be able to see how they were configured, and we need to hear back. We need to know for certain. The appearances is that administration resides with a third party. We need to hear back whether that's the case or not. We need to know. And what we need to do in the future is we need to make sure that administration resides with the state. Administration resides with the county. We need to get the envelopes.
Signatures.
Yeah, we need to get the envelopes for the mail ballots. We've been told we have them. It seems like somebody could either walk over and show us where that's at, or they can bring it to us, or give it to us. So we need to get that, and then of course we'll get, if you can send us that list. We did our best to write those things down, but we'll get the list. And I think from my perspective, that's kind of the two ways this is going to go. It'll either be an incomplete forensic audit with the findings and the things that we've got so far, or it will be incomplete if we don't have those items.
Thank you. Once again, I just want to state that that at no time have we ever implied or inferred that there was any intentional misdoings here in any way whatsoever. And in fact, we certainly hope not. But we do need to have this information and answer these questions so that we can make sure that the voters of Arizona have solid answers as to how our election systems works, the check and balances, to know that they have a safe and secure ballot when it comes in. So we will be asking for this additional information. We'll find out whether, I'm guessing we're going to have to go back to court unless Maricopa County will say, yes, let's work on this together, which I thought we would do. I do not know why Maricopa County has fought this so hard. If it's their electoral system, I would think they would want to know that everything is operating the way it should, and I believe that our Secretary of State would feel the same way. So we will endeavor to keep getting the answers. What do they say? The whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. And we'll move forward and get whatever we can to help you finish this audit. So we appreciate you flying in for this. We appreciate the time that you've put here, and we'll just keep moving forward. Now, before we adjourn, I would like security to please escort these three men out. For security reasons, we were instructed that we need to let them out first. And with that, thank you all very much for attending. We appreciate you being here, and we'll just keep moving forward with as much as we can, and we'll start giving more and more information out to everybody. So thank you. And we are adjourned.